well. You know that governments, they are happy to talk, they're happy to meet, and they meet in different fora. Last year we had the climate change, climate agreement meeting in Belém, Brazil. And this year earlier we had WTO ministerial in Cameroon. So both developing countries have specific problems. So the question is, what do we do now? Because these conferences, both and the ones before, resulted in failure, which I believe is mainly governance failure. But it's not what they call climate fatigue. It's not a legal argument. It's a political argument. And that's very useful to postpone mitigation and adaptation projects when you say, no, we can't do this now, and our voters don't like it, and we won't be re-elected, things like that. So we have other emergencies. We have wars, we have finance problems, we have domestic priorities. You hear that in every country, yeah, rich and poor. So that's the first point. Second point is we have treaties, what I just mentioned, and they are very clear, very specific commitments in those treaties. That's for climate lawyers a very good thing. The problem for climate lawyers is that the challenge in these treaties is different because these treaties, both treaties, multilateral treaties, contradict each other, not in their objectives. The objectives are fine. It's a bit of blah blah sometimes, but still they're fine. But in their measures and in their rules, in their prohibitions, in their what they allow or disallow. Yeah. First, the climate agreement prescribes differentiation according to the climate agreement, which everybody has ratified. One country, the US, has de-ratified it. You must differentiate between different products, more or less green, climate-friendly products, and you must differentiate between countries. Developing countries, and then I wouldn't put all the developed countries in the same basket, of course. You have rich and poor developing countries. So this is a prescription differentiation. Whereas in the WTO, the World Trade Organization, it prohibits such differentiations. It prohibits discrimination, and it prohibits a preferential treatment when you have, for instance, two types of steel, what you call a green steel and a non-green steel. The WTO does not allow you to have two tariffs, two different tariffs for the same steel tariff line, if it's a different CO2 emission in the production of that steel, and the transport and the marketing of that steel, and insertion in a car, in an airplane. So normal steel and green steel cannot be treated differently, and that's what the climate agreement wanted to be. Yes. Third point, no government wants to negotiate. That's the big disaster now we have. Many ministerial conferences, like the ones in Brazil and Cameroon, have engaged and continue to engage in blame games. That's always easy. Or at best, they call it conversations. Yeah, in conversations. But after 5 or 10 years, I have a bit of a climate fatigue, a conversation fatigue. And the same, by the way, goes for the infamous World Economic Forum in Davos. In February, they meet with all the big guys from the whole world coming to Davos, Switzerland, where they make pledges, what they're going to do, and then no follow-up. Just no follow-up. And the WEF, which is a huge organization, you pay a fortune to attend and to listen to the pundits of the whole world, the big guys. And that's a big problem. So maybe you want to know why this is a problem.
Yes, of course.
Why is this a problem? Because now we have technological progress. The thing is that these domestic measures, first of all, even when you have incentives and disincentives, that's fine. What is on the other side, and that's just a parenthesis, my remark on India, but on many other countries also. When you have now the possibility of air condition for upper classes, this further polarizes poor countries. In India and in Algeria and in many countries, you cannot grow rice or potatoes above 50 degrees centigrade. It's not possible to work. So the class divide increases with climate change. And that's a big problem we have, but that's not the point today. The question is, what do we do with those different technologies? Now, the legal problem which I see is international competition without what you call a level playing field. Cars, smartphones, and the so-called green investment funds in trade financing, investment financing, they have components from dozens of countries with different standards, different monitoring, different certification. So how can you all roll it up into one question of competitivity or not? This is a legal problem which is substantial and existential. And that is to explain why the regulators in all countries and internationally have failed to move beyond their intentions to clarify treaty implementation. Meanwhile, we have a situation today WTO trade rules. I told you the problem is not only the problem is this non-discrimination, but also the rules are no longer enforceable. We don't have a court anymore, a dispute settlement body. And that's my personal point, finding in my publications, these WTO trade rules bark up the wrong tree because they cannot distinguish between green steel and non-green steel. That's on WTO. But also the climate agreement has a problem with their rules because these rules do not prescribe which emissions must be reduced, how, where, and when. And this, of course, matters for competing with different types of steel or paper or cement, whatever, name it, agriculture. So what we have is unilateral actions, undisciplined, unregulated, internationally unsanctioned, and these unilateral actions to go greener yourself. The problem is you tend to discriminate foreign merchandise and service suppliers. You reduce competition, and so the world will not be greener. So what do we get there with this technology gap and with this problem of implementation on a level playing field? We have the free riders. Free riders and rejoice. They invest in sovereign countries. Everybody's sovereign. We are sovereign. And yeah, there's no G20, there's no G7, there's no nothing because sovereignty first, meaning reindustrialization, industrial policy, call it all the big names, the nice names which economists hate. So free riders get a free ride in sovereign countries because they get tax holidays, they get subsidies, and closed eyes everywhere where you come with a couple of billion dollars. Say I'm investing in a factory with 2,000 jobs. You have the president at the airport coming to fetch you with a red carpet and say and ask you how much water do you need, how much electricity for free, how many years when you train my engineers and my workers. So technologies alone cannot solve the problem. So now I have brought forward all the problems. Where are the solutions? And which solutions prevent the free riding benefits at the expense of climate? Yeah, that's something which governments fail to face. So you rename the thing and call it emitter price principle. You have to ask the emitters to pay. That will go downstream, and then at the end of the life cycle, the consumers will have to pay more for their airplane tickets, for their cars, for their smartphones, whatever. So what we want is not those easy answers and the difficult EPP, but what we want is a preferential market access, which has good advantages for climate-friendly products, services, and investments and finance. That's the solution we need. And this is possible, but for that we need comparable and progressive standards. And these standards have to improve as we go, and they may have to be different between a richer and a poorer country. That's also quite clear. I'm not saying that's an easy solution, but I do think that goodwill can bring a target moving. You can schedule it. You can lay down the principles by which you will increase your standards once you have reached the target 1, target 2, target 3. You can lay down that in a treaty, a regional or plurilateral treaty. For example, and that's the big name, of course, carbon costing. Economists everywhere and the World Bank in its unisono voice, they say carbon costing is a big solution, the best way to avoid eco-dumping, to avoid carbon leakage, what they call, at the expense of climate-smart producers. So they call it an easy way. No, they call it the best way. They don't say it's easy. Mm-hmm. We have now today a situation where more than 80 countries have started to tax their CO2 emissions. Wonderful. The problem is they do it in 80 different ways. So then comparability is difficult. Competition becomes non-level playing field. And that's what we have. And on the other side, we have those orthodox lawyers. They criticize the tariffs, carbon tariffs, and they criticize duties, internal duties post-border crossing, right? And the WTO has never issued a ruling. The EU has proposed its CBAM, the so-called CBAM, carbon border adjustment measure, and there were loud outcries in Geneva in the WTO. There was one complaint, lo and behold, by Russia, and it never went far because the EU refuses to negotiate or to consult even on such complaints. The big guys who didn't like that at all, that includes India, Brazil, South Africa. They threatened action, but they did not complain formally in the WTO. They negotiated, which is very wise, because what you do in trade, you negotiate or you litigate. And when you see that litigation will not find a solution, then you negotiate. And that's what they do. So now you have these so-called mega regionals, the big stories, EU, India, EU, Mercosur, EU, South Africa, a bit less, but still we start taxing our CO2 producers' emissions And let's see how we get something equivalent. And that's the key word. So in these regional trade agreements, free trade agreements, call what you like, they can find equivalent best efforts between their different member countries, poorer, richer, bigger, smaller, focused on one product or focused on 75 products or 7,000 products. Equivalent best effort is the solution for a way forward. So you have to define which products do we talk about? How do we define climate friendliness? How do we define climate friendly services also? Anything, banking or telephones or, e-commerce, digital trade. And this can then be agreed in a treaty for preferential trade conditions. These climate friendly stuff can come to my country and to your country at a preferential rate, more better than the non-green stuff from third countries or even from your country, which does not produce green steel only. So this is the way forward. It is found now. The EU has told India agreement after 20 years of negotiations. I did 2 impact studies for the EU for agriculture in India and the EU, and they never got very far, and let alone for investment. But they did a threesome treaty between EU and India, signed, glorifying last year, and now entered provisionally into force. And in this treaty, the EU has said, yes, we will negotiate with you, India, something equivalent. You have agreed to do something on carbon tax, and we will recognize this as sort of an equivalence. Then you don't have to pay this horrible CBAM thing. Yeah, they will see that what leaves India for the EU has something green in it. Yeah, so that's the way forward between mega regional treaties. And when you have such an agreement, this also complies with the differentiation commitment in the climate agreement. And this is very important. So what you tell your parliament is not that we have to do it because the EU wants it and otherwise we cannot sell our mangoes to France, but also we have to do something because we ratified the climate agreement. This is something which every country can argue also as a reason why to go forward. So we have this emerging, I call it good protectionism. You may call this an oxymoron because protectionism is never good, something pejorative, but what kind of protection matters, and if it helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you have it. It's a good type of protection. Now, this is a solution which is not a multilateral golden bullet, very clearly. We are not able now, and for a long time to come, to agree on multilateral solutions. But even for reluctant governments and operators, this is still a better solution than continuing the blame game. In 8 words, more secure, freer, and greener trade and investments. It is, yes, we can. That's all I wanted to say today.